counting down. Are we with the big group?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So they're hearing me now.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
You guys are good to go whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let me give a minute. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Maureen, and welcome to the webinar that has been organized by the International Epidemiology Association Early Career Epidemiologist Representatives. So as early career epidemiologist representatives, we organize activities tailored towards the early career epidemiologist career development needs. And some of our activities, we target even non-members, but there are some activities that we target only early career epidemiologist members. So before I go on, may I introduce the Laura and Samantha to introduce themselves, then I'll introduce our presenter at a later stage. Thank you.
Hi, I believe Laura will not be able to attend, but my name's Samantha and I work for IEA, and I will just be monitoring the chat and questions and making sure everything goes smoothly. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, so again, welcome to our webinar on how to write a paper and get it published. And this is the first of a three-part series webinar. And we are going to have subsequent webinars, most likely in October, November. The topics haven't been finalized for the subsequent webinars, but our second webinar is more likely to be covering topics around tables, figures, results, discussion sections of a manuscript. Then the third webinar will be maybe focusing on introduction to methods. We'll also introduce maybe topics around abstracts, choosing a journal, authorship, ethics and of publishing, references, peer review. So these could be topics that will come in our subsequent webinars that are likely to take place in October, November. And so as I mentioned, that is early career epidemiologist representatives for the International Epidemiology Association, we plan activities tailored towards the career development needs of early career epidemiologists. Some of the activities that we are planning that are coming or we are planning include the World Congress of Epidemiology, which is coming in September and it's in Cape Town. We also have organized a 6-day immersion program for the early career epidemiologist members that is going to happen in Portugal. And we also planning a 1-week-long in-person writing workshop. We are also planning that our presenter today will be facilitating this workshop, but this is also in the planning stage that is likely to happen next year. So those who are not members of the International Epidemiology Association, I encourage you to visit the website. Maybe Samantha, you can share the link on the chat, then visit the link and learn about the aims of the International Epidemiology Association, also how to join as a member and the benefits of joining the International Epidemiology Association. So, so now I want to introduce our speaker. I think we are very privileged to have Dr. McFarland or Willi, who is going to present us on how to write a paper and get it published. So he's going to present, and at the end of his presentation, we will have time for questions, and he will be answering your questions. And we are expecting a large number to attend, so you might not be able to answer all the questions. But we'll send him the questions into response, and then we'll share his responses with everyone. We are also recording the session. Then we'll also be sharing the recordings with everyone we have registered for the session. So as I said, mentioned that we are very privileged to have Dr. McFarland, who is presenting for us on how to write a paper and get it published. He is a professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine, and the director of the Center for Public Health Research at the San Francisco Department of Public Health. He conducts research on the epidemiology and prevention of HIV in California and internationally. His primary emphasis is on methods for epidemiological research and surveillance in populations experiencing disparities in HIV, STI, and other infectious diseases. He is funded for several active longitudinal and cross-sectional studies by the CDC and NIH. He is also the recipient of multiple grants for the teaching of research methods from the undergraduate through postdoctoral levels. And Dr. McFarland has 484 peer-reviewed scientific journal publications and has been teaching scientific writing around the world for nearly 30 years. So we are really privileged to have you, Dr. Willi, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Melina. I'll share the screen.
Sure.
And great. I hope we're ready to roll. So good morning and good evening, wherever you are in the world. I know we at least are covering Cape Town to California, so it could be any time where you are. What I want to share with you today, I think we have an hour, a little over an hour, hour and a half, is a consolidation of the lectures that we give for writing workshops that usually last a week to 10 days. And the one that Moline said we'll be organizing in South Africa early next year. Those in turn, those workshop lectures in turn are a consolidation of a semester-long course that we give to our graduate students, postdocs, and junior faculty to help them write at the University of California. So I've compressed a lot of information here. The workshop and the course are very technical, but what I tried to do with this next hour is convert most of what's very technical to something more motivational. So giving you an overview and giving you inspiration and giving you the tricks and tips to avoid writer's block, to keep your paper moving forward. That is a simple structure or model to write a scientific paper. And then some insights and some experiences with what it takes to get the editors of journals to look at your paper, what it takes to get the reviewers of paper to quickly understand you and increase your chance of acceptance. So as a motivational speaker, I'm not usually doing motivational talks, but my understanding, like from TED Talks, is you either open with some sort of joke or you open with sharing a very personal experience, what motivates myself to write scientific papers, for example. So I'm going to go with the latter, and I'll share personally with you that this year I turned 60, and 60 is definitely one of these birthdays of reflection. And one thing that you're reflecting on, of course, is how much longer you're going to work or when are you going to retire. So clearly that's on my mind. So as Malene mentioned, I work both for the University of California, San Francisco, but as well as the city health department. So if I'm gonna retire, the age of retirement for maximizing my pension with the civil service of the city would be precisely at 65.17 years old. That falls on January 2030. So there's a target. So I've said to myself, okay, I've said this long ago, actually, before I retire, I have two really important life goals that I want to achieve. Goal number one is to end the HIV epidemic. Now, that's obviously a very tall order, but I was gratified to see that the United Nations is going to help me with my retirement wish several years ago. For those of you involved in HIV research or HIV programs, I think you know that the United Nations, UNAIDS, declared that they wanted to end the HIV epidemic by 2030. So that perfectly aligns with my goal as well. And it looks like there's been tremendous achievement that I've seen over my life, with the initial epidemic bringing all our tools to bear on it, the treatments becoming better, the prevention becoming better, that it looks as though the 60 years of my adult life so far is going to actually be the epidemic cycle of HIV. And we're somewhat on track, if not completely eradicated. We are on track to eliminating it as a major source of morbidity and mortality in the world. So hopefully on track for that. My second retirement goal was to publish 500 papers before I can retire. And from the introduction, I'm hoping you realize that, yes, that also is within reach. Malene said I had 484 publications. It's not like I had 3 more since she started speaking, but 3 more publications since I sent her that a little bit about myself blurb. 13 more to go before I can retire. And I think that's going to be easily achievable or exceedable within the next 4 or 5 years. So what I want to do is share with you how I'm doing this, how it is that I'm able to have a career that publishes 500 scientific peer-reviewed journal publications. I'm going to share these tips and tricks and secrets and offer you what will, I hope you'll see as a very simple model, a very almost sort of fill in the blanks for your original research, and your paper will take shape. I'll begin with sharing 10 tips, tricks, or secrets. I don't know if they're secrets, so to speak, but they're 10 tips that I think guide the way that I put this together. So I'll tell you up front, you don't have to read 487 of my publications to get the idea. Almost all of them follow this pattern. If you read one of them, you'll see the pattern in any one of my papers that come up. And you'll probably see this pattern in my students and mentees and people that have been in the workshop as well. And I can't say I totally invented this from nothing, because I think you'll see this, you'll recognize this pattern in other publications as well. But what I've done is I've distilled it down to a formulaic approach, a template, a model that fits most papers that are writing up quantitative public health data or clinical research. Okay, so what are these 10 tips? Over the years, as I've grown older, it's like, you ossify in your way of doing things, and it's hard to change it around too much. So I feel like these have almost become my 10 commandments of how to put a paper together. So let me run through the 10 commandments of writing a paper, and then I'll circle back and do a deeper dive into a few of them. Number one, and I will do a deeper dive on this, and I think it's the most important to bear in mind. And if you walk away with anything, I hope it's this one. Find your message early. Find the message of your paper early. And often that is a challenge, not because you have nothing to say, but a challenge because you have too much to say. And the trick is to zero in on one most important message. 2, from that message, write in a backwards order from the message. I'll elaborate a bit on that in a moment. Number 3, follow the journal instructions. Now, I'm hoping this is intuitively obvious. Of course, if you pick a journal to submit to, you're going to follow the instructions, but you'd be surprised. You know, your mind has a way of doing things and you want to do things a certain way, but a trick to making sure an editor is favorable to your paper, that a reader, a reviewer, a peer reviewer is favorable to your paper, is to follow to the letter the instructions. Tip number 4 is a 4x4 outline. That's basically 16 sentences. So in other words, if doing my workshop, or if you can give me 16 sentences that are the topic sentences of each paragraph of each of the major sections of a paper, I can pretty much fill out the rest. It can easily be done. And so if you can think of 16 sentences, your paper can take shape. Tip number 5, maybe this is more motivational than technical. Only write on something you are passionate about. Now, again, maybe you are thinking, well, that's intuitively obvious. Why would I not do such a thing? Again, you might be surprised. Students, postdocs, junior faculty sometimes feel they're obliged to write a paper because their supervisor tells them to, their boss tells them to, or they feel for some reason, this is the paper I have to write first, but the paper I really want to write is something else. Don't fall into that trap. Write on the one you really want to write. Find time to write. Now, a lot of the reason why we've created the course in the first place and why we've created the in-country workshops in the first place is to rip people away from their day-to-day responsibilities, their managing programs, their clinical care that they have to provide, their teaching, rip them away and bring them into a workshop or retreat. But trying to also translate that to building in the time to write throughout your career. 7 is peer review. And by this, of course, you have to have peer review for a scientific journal. But what I'm pointing to is internal peer review with your colleagues and friends and people in your co-authors that are also writing. You're going to get a lot of criticism on your paper, on your manuscripts. You have to get used to it. If you're in the field of science, if you're in the field of publishing, it's a fact of life. You get lots of criticism. And after 30 years of doing it and teaching it and 487 papers, I know human nature is you do not like this. And I still have an initial instinct to get defensive and react negatively. So the advice is do it in a friendly environment as you compose your paper. And we build that into the workshops as well. Tip number 8 is something that was drilled into me in high school by my AP English teacher, advanced placement English teacher in senior year of high school. She drilled this into us that to write well is to write concisely. And again, maybe that's intuitive, but maybe it's not, because when you're publishing in the scientific literature, there's a defensiveness or an inclination to sound really smart and make complicated sentences with very big words. And you do read these. These do get published, and it feels like a style of many fields. But to write clearly and to get the editors and peer reviewers' attention is to write concisely. Maybe I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. Number 9, purely motivational. I'll share with you reasons why you should remember why you're doing this, why you want to publish, why you want to write. And 10, also motivational. Don't get discouraged. As I just said, this is a field, this is an endeavor that you get lots of criticism leveled at you. And it's very discouraging. It's a field where you get lots of rejection. Pick yourself up, don't get discouraged, try again, try with a different journal. Okay, let me circle back on some of these messages. Tip number 1, find your message early. This came out, it was an insight to me when I was hearing a presentation given by a colleague at UCSF, Professor Gavin Yamey, who was coming off of serving 17 years as one of the editors for BMJ, British Medical Journal. And he shared with us what it's like to be an editor of a prestigious journal where most papers are going to be rejected. And he said, you'll be discouraged to hear that I get about 1,000 papers to quickly review to see if it goes on to peer review or immediate rejection. Get 1,000 a year. So that's 17,000 papers came across my desk. And you as the writer probably think the editor is going to read everything I've written and they'll love the way I've crafted this manuscript because I spent so much time writing everything. And he said, no, unfortunately, I don't read the whole manuscript. I don't even read the whole abstract. I only read a few places. I'll get to them in a moment. And what I'm doing is looking for a single clear message that I know adds to the literature. I don't need someone to tell me a summary of everything that prove they're very smart. I'm looking for a single message. And within 4 sentences that I look at in the manuscript, I decide whether to send it on to peer review or give it an immediate rejection. So the challenge here is you're so passionate about your data and so passionate about what you've written that the forest is lost to the trees, or to use that metaphor. What I'm trying to say is it's hard to let go of trying to say too much all at once up front. The trick is to zero in on a single important finding. And maybe at first you're not convinced that it's this one thing. You're saying, but there's more, there's more. The tool is find one and start with that and set the others aside for now. They'll come back later, but what you really need to do is target one single most important message, and the others will come back. And that message should be there if you take a step back. If you have the study was written as a protocol, or if you had your original research question, it might be objective number 1, or if that paper has been written, objective 2 or 3, for example. Or if you're looking at programmatic data or surveillance data or some sort of survey that really asked a lot of different domains and questions, and you didn't necessarily start with a single hypothesis, but you found something that was unusual through exploratory analysis, something that stood out, something unexpected perhaps, that might be the message to zero in on as well. Okay. So again, your job is not to impress an editor or an expert in the field that you know everything about the topic. This is not a PhD. What you're writing when you're writing up new data from a study or from a program is not a PhD dissertation. It's not even a master's thesis. It's not a book chapter. It's not a review paper. It's not showing that you know everything about the topic. So you're not writing to the topic, you're writing to the message. What you are showing is you know enough about the literature to know this is an important new finding. So anything that sounds like an entire review of the literature in your introduction before you get to your question or your point is going to lose the reader very quickly. It's going to lose the editor. It's going to lose the peer reviewer. And it actually adds a challenge. I know lots of people say, well, I've done my PhD or I've done my master's thesis. I want to convert it to a manuscript publication. There you can see the challenge is you'll try to say too much. It's fishing out what's most important, and a lot of the length of that dissertation or thesis will disappear. Okay, so your task is to show you have a clear message that adds something new to the literature, and start with one thing. Okay, so what were those 4 sentences that this editor said in looking at 1,000 manuscripts a year, 17,000 manuscripts in 17 years? He said, I look at just 4 things, just 4 sentences. And not only is it just 4 sentences, they want to see the same thing actually in all 4 places. In fact, mixing it up would lose it. It's the repetition that drives the message home. This is something politicians know, something that lawyers know, that repeat, no matter what the question being asked, giving the same answer over and over again is a communication tool. And it suits well for getting the editor's attention. Okay, the first sentence, perhaps it's not really a sentence, is the title, of course. Getting their attention with the title. Of course, everybody's looking at titles. When you do PubMed searches, literature searches, you're going to read the title. So of course, the title has to somehow, it doesn't necessarily say this, it can, but it doesn't necessarily say the message as a sentence, but the title anticipates what the message will be. Then, as he confessed, he doesn't read the whole abstract even. You'd think they'd at least read the whole abstract. He says, I cut to one sentence in the abstract. It's either the last sentence or the second to last sentence of an abstract. And that's where it gives another recap of the message once again, and it will be there as a sentence. So if you keep this in mind when writing an abstract, like for a conference presentation, this suits you well. In fact, for an abstract, the title is almost everything, and you have a little bit more license to be catchy and sensational. I'll do a deeper dive on that in a moment. But that message, crafted as a very clear short sentence, will appear as the penultimate or second to last sentence of an abstract, and that's what they're looking for. The third place is, he said, okay, I'll flip the manuscript or scroll the manuscript all the way to the discussion section, which is near the end, and I will read the first sentence of the first paragraph of the discussion and no more. So that first sentence of the first paragraph has to grab people with the message. It's crafted very carefully as the single most important message. It's kind of the headline. It's the mission accomplished statement. It's, if this is all a tired medical resident reads late at night preparing for rounds the next day, that's where it should be. Okay, so where's the fourth place? The fourth place you'll recognize if you ever have submitted a paper to a journal. The fourth place where this message should appear is in the process of uploading your manuscript. There's a lot of boxes and things you have to fill. It's tedious, it's annoying, it takes a long time. One box will say something like, do you have anything to say to the editor? And you know how some fields, when you're filling out a form or filling out something online, it has an asterisk or it's highlighted in red, so you can't proceed unless you put something there. This box will actually say it's optional. So you can proceed with the rest of the upload without putting something there. But my advice and the advice of this editor is don't do that. The editor does look at that. And that's once again a statement of the main message of your paper. What is the single most important finding said directly to the editor? So that is the fourth place. It's treated as not optional. Okay, extra tip, keep this sentence short. Again, the challenge is you will want to say too much. The challenge is in your mind, there were so many exciting findings in your paper, or so many honest qualifications of limitations of your findings that you'll be tempted to say too much. Keep it short. How short is short? This is another commandment or mantra of mine. 22 words or fewer. I'm actually not making this up. Again, my high school English teacher 40 plus years ago said this to us. A typical good sentence in the English language should be 22 words or fewer. That's not true of all languages. In fact, English is known to be more concise than many other languages. She didn't make it up either. If you Google it, you'll see something like this. You'll see something like the history of English sentences, you know, in Charles Darwin's time, 150 years ago, might have been 40, 50 words for a sentence. My English teacher would say, if you have a sentence that's 40 words long, it's probably more than one sentence. Break it up. Keep it to 22 words or fewer. Okay. So let me give an example of this advice to stick to the message, repeat the message, put it in 4 places. Okay. So here's a paper written in one of our writing workshops from Paraguay. The title is High HIV Prevalence Among Transgender Women in Paraguay. 8 words. Perfect. Very short, very concise. And it's not a sentence in the sense that it has a verb, but you can clearly see the message here. If that is all someone scanning many, many papers saw, they would know exactly what this paper is about. They would get the main message. Are there other messages there? Yes, there's risk factors for HIV, for example. There's preventive behaviors, risk behaviors. That's all there, and the temptation is to say it all at once, but find one and stick to it. It usually will be the one that feels most important, the one that the evidence of your data most supports. But it is hard to let go of those others. They'll come back, but stick to one. High HIV prevalence among transgender women in Paraguay. Hopefully not lost on anybody. Oh yes, I was asked, Malene said, titles are of great interest to our audience. So I'm gonna do a digression, a deeper dive into titles at this moment. And this is also something that's very, very important for abstracts for conference presentations. Actually, before I do this deeper dive, let me just check with Malene that my accent is okay, my pace is okay. I'm not speaking too fast, too softly. It seems okay.
It's perfect. Good.
Okay, good. Deeper dive into titles. To my mind, I kind of see that there's a pattern of 4 different types of titles that you'll find for scientific publications and abstracts. Explanatory, there's different names from, I ended up calling them explanatory titles, declaratory titles, interrogatory titles, and cute and catchy titles. Okay, what do these mean? Let's start with the explanatory title. This type of title is far and away the most common. It's meant to be objective. It's meant to not give the message as a sentence necessarily, but it sort of anticipates the message that's going to be there. I'm going to start with this one because some journals will tell you in their instructions that this is the only type of title that they will accept. So I'll talk about 3 other types of titles. Be very careful that some journals will say only use this kind of title. And I would also say of my 487 publications, more than 90% of them will use an explanatory title. Here's an example of what I mean by this. The title of the paper as published would be Uptake of HIV Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis in Zanzibar 2023. So it's explanatory of what the paper will be about, but it doesn't divulge the answer. In other words, it's not saying, was it high? Was it low? What was it? The message becomes uptake of HIV PrEP services was low in Zanzibar. So that's phrased, the same sort of message is now phrased as an answer to that, or as a full sentence. Here's another one. Impact of a single session of counseling on partner referral for sexually transmitted disease treatment in Zimbabwe. So again, it's the impact. It's not yet answering the question, but if someone sees that title, what they want to see next is, gosh, I wonder if it worked. Was the uptake good or bad? Did it improve partner services? So the message then, as a sentence, is a single counseling session significantly increased the treatment of partners for sexually transmitted diseases in Zimbabwe. So that's the message, that's the sentence. And those, you can sort of see what I'm saying. Those are 2 places that you've repeated this, 2 of the 4 places where you've given this message. The title, and then this sentence crafted as a sentence could be the second to last sentence of the abstract, or it could be the first sentence of the discussion, or it could even be a sentence that would be in the cover letter or that box to the editor. Okay. The next type is actually using that sentence as the title itself. I think you've probably seen these, right? The title is the message crafted as a sentence. And I think journals will often call this the a results title, because the results is right there in the title. But again, a couple caveats on doing this. One is the journal instructions may say, do not use this. Do not use this type of title. Don't use a results title. Don't use a declaratory title. Make an objective title. So check for sure. And the reason they're doing this is it sounds less objective to make this declaration in the title. So in other words, if you declare it as a sentence in sort of saying case closed, maybe they're thinking, well, you have proved nothing to me yet. So now you've psychologically poised the reader to try to find the flaw. In other words, you say this intervention works, or this partner services increases uptake of HIV testing. It's almost psychologically a challenge, or it provokes them. It invites disagreement. If, in other words, that's all they've seen and you've not proven your case yet. So the psychological trick is start within like you may believe it and you're going to show data to support that, but the trick is to kind of pose it as, I'm objectively looking at the impact of counseling on partner notification services. And you're sort of saying, I'm a scientist, I don't know, but I will follow the evidence wherever it takes me. That's kind of the idea of why you might avoid this kind of declaratory title. So again, here's some example. Deferral of blood donors with risk factors for HIV saves lives and money in Zimbabwe. So it's a big claim. Low socioeconomic status is associated with higher rate of death in the era of ART. Again, it's a claim. Now, part of my trick and part of my tip would be you can use this kind of declaratory title for conference presentations, for conference abstracts. It actually, in that case, you might actually want to psychologically provoke someone or get their attention, get their interest, and have them read carefully what you've written. So and conferences tend to like this kind of thing. So that's fine. It's actually probably a good strategy. But for a journal, they're going to want to make it feel that it's more objective. So you might have to avoid this kind of title. And they may tell you in their instructions, do not do it. Okay. Another type of title is the interrogatory title. And by this, I mean, this is the title that puts the question mark in the title itself. So it poses a question. So this sounds like it's going back to being a little bit more objective, a little bit more, I will follow the evidence wherever it takes to answer this question. But I would say beware. It also has a bit of a psychological provocation as well. If you pose a question, if you put the question mark in the title, you better answer this question. Because now you've even positioned yourself to say, this is the title and this question will be answered. And sometimes the answer is more nuanced, or you're showing data that are talking about other things other than answering this question. So if you use a question mark in your title, you better really, really answer that question. And you better answer it in those 3 other places that I mentioned. So here are some examples. This was a paper, I guess it's long enough ago that I'll say I was a peer reviewer for a journal for this. And the title was, will we get to zero? Oh, no, sorry, this is one of mine. I was thinking of a different one. This is my paper. I didn't want to do this, but my graduate student really wanted to pose the question in the title. Will we get to zero HIV stigma in San Francisco? And it was an examination of trends in people's attitudes towards people living with HIV, the stigmatizing attitudes. So I cautioned her that if you use this title, you better answer this question. So let me ask you, what is the answer? Will we get to zero stigma in San Francisco? And again, if the answer becomes like, well, there's some encouraging signs and it hasn't been done and we could intervene and here's where we need to target, you might have lost the editor or you've lost the reader on this. You have to be clear. So I would have said, I think the answer is no, that we are not on track to end HIV stigma in San Francisco. Let's be clear about that. Okay, this is the one I was initially thinking of, the one that I reviewed. Is there a heterosexual HIV epidemic in the United States? Now, of course, early in the epidemic, our epidemic was clearly very concentrated in key populations. But once, in our cities, and I think the first publication of AIDS describing it in the literature was actually Los Angeles, California, and it was among gay men. So when we started to see data emerging from Africa, the question was, well, are we also missing, or is somehow out there a heterosexual epidemic? So do we have one? So when this paper came across my desk, I thought, oh yeah, this is a great question. And the paper didn't answer it. it really left me hanging. And I have to say, the psychology of posing a great question and never answering it in your paper is damaging. So my attitude, it happened to be a paper on people who initially had no risk reported in the data and what they turned out to be, and it wasn't very conclusive at all. So yeah, they probably had a message in there somewhere, but it wasn't the answer to this question. Okay. Here's another one. How are transgender women acquiring HIV? Again, this was a graduate student of mine, a postdoc of mine, wanted to put the question mark in the title. You can kind of tell my attitude is be very, very careful. And I say, well, can you answer that question? How are they getting HIV? And it was nuanced. So I said, all right, look, if you're going to go with that title, let's prime the title to make sure that it's going to be something that's an in-depth look rather than a simple multiple choice answer, a single very complete answer. So let's say it's insights from phylogenetic transmission clusters in San Francisco. Insights, not necessarily here's exactly where all trans women are getting infected. So we tempered this question mark title with a little bit more to it. Okay. The fourth type, the cute and catchy title. And I think you've seen these. These are very common for conferences. They're much more common in social science journals than they are in clinical, epidemiological, public health journals. It's using humor, something that sounds hip or cool at the moment, or something, a terminology or phrase that's being hype, that's creating hype. Again, common for conferences, common for social sciences, tends to be frowned upon in clinical research journals, public health journals, and in biomedical or laboratory-based journals, for example. So again, you probably will anticipate that I'm going to give you some warning about this. The first warning is this: a joke gets old. So what seems really cute and catchy and funny, or tying to some meme that's currently very popular, gets old very quickly. Publications are forever. How many times can you look at your own CV or share a paper that has some sort of joke that now seems pretty old? So I will tell you this, maybe 1 to 2% of my 400 papers, maybe 10, 20 papers, I have this kind of funny title. I've always regretted it, and I've not always been able to talk my students out of it. The other thing to bear in mind is, by being humorous or glib, you're being flippant about something that could be a very serious health issue. So while in your collegial environment and while working on this, dedicating your life to these diseases, it seems acceptable and appropriate, but think again of someone not in your circle, not in your field, that might wonder why this sounds humorous. So what are some examples? These are papers that I've published. I'm co-authoring with a lot of my students. And as I said, I roll my eyes, I tend to regret it, but they're there. So one, is this idea of a play on words or pun or metaphor. The title is The Road to End the Epidemic, a study of HIV along transit corridors in Tanzania. You see what we did there? How we played on those play of words there. Sounded good at the time. I don't know how many times I can do this lecture and include that without getting a bit cringy. Another type is an attention grab. I had colleagues that had just finished a study with men who have sex with men in February of 2022, which is the month, even days before the invasion by Russia. And, it's whatever program they were doing at the time, of course, is very disrupted. And they're wondering, well, is this a priority to get this paper out? They were in exile at the time. I said, well, maybe you can play the sympathy card and somehow submit this paper on the wake of this invasion. And maybe the editors will say, well, we better hear from Ukraine, sorry. So the title is Report from Ukraine, Peer-Driven Interventions Successfully Deliver HIV status neutral prevention to the hardest to reach population. So this is both sort of one of these catchy titles as well as somewhat declaratory, saying what the answer was. Maybe, I don't know if I'll end up regretting that one. This one I definitely regret. I think we published it in 1996, I want to say, many, many years ago. The title was Sexual Cruising on the Internet Highway. Now, in my defense, in the 1990s, that sounded very hip and cool and with it. Right now, if my children read this, they are gonna roll their eyes at me and say, Dad, how could you have called a publication this? This sounds embarrassing. Okay. A little bit of research on the types of titles and titles themselves. They've even done randomized trials of offering different titles to people and seeing what they prefer. There's now lots of data with electronic downloads, clicking on papers and downloading them. They have actually very quantifiable data on, observational data on what types of titles get more clicks and more downloads and more citations. So here's what the research tends to show. Shorter titles get more downloads and more citations. Now, in the academic world and the scientific research world, it's not enough just to have lots of publications, to have 487 publications. The other metric of your success is how often other researchers cite them. So you want your papers to be cited. So a tip is shorter titles get more downloads and more citations. And by extension, would have to say they probably also get more attention of editors and peer reviewers for journals if the title is shorter. Results in the titles get more citations than methods in the titles. So to some degree, the declaratory or results titles can be an advantage. Again, notwithstanding that they're more provocative. Okay, now this one you probably could see why. The cute or funny titles get more downloads, but fewer citations. And they get more clicks, therefore. So you can kind of see what's going on. The cute and catchy title is a clickbait, that it gets their attention, they download it, sounds interesting, they get intrigued, but it sounds like less scientific for them to cite you. So that's another caveat of the cute and catchy title. This is unfortunate data that if you put the place of the study in the title, it gets fewer citations. So if you have in Zanzibar, in South Africa, in Chile, in the title, it seems to get fewer citations than if you don't put the place in the title. I think it's unfortunate because I actually do like to see where and when this study was done. But I guess the psychology is that when people cite work, they want it to sound very generalizable. They want it to be more generalizable scientific knowledge. So if the title sort of says, well, this is only going to be relevant to Zanzibar or Chile, they might not include it in place. They would use one that doesn't have that in the title, even if that other one was done only in one specific place as well. Okay, the data also say that the question mark, the colon, and the hyphen get fewer citations than titles without those. So bear that in mind. So you can see some of the slide. I think we're sharing the slides, so you can look at some of these references. Okay, that was, I'm using up a lot of time. We'll see if we can cut me off at some point for questions, but that was a deeper dive in titles because I think it's very important for manuscripts, but even probably more important for abstracts for conferences. All right, so let me circle back to the other parts again. So this was the title. High HIV prevalence among transgender women in Paraguay. So that's place number 1 for the editor. Place number 2, this was the second to last sentence of this paper. Trans women in Paraguay need to be prioritized for interventions with high HIV prevention efficacy. It's a little bit different than just saying there's high HIV prevalence, but it leans more towards call for public health action or recommendations, but similar message, 15 words. Here is the first sentence of the first paragraph of the discussion. 22 words. I think I had to make this one fit by editing what was originally written. Paraguay joins an increasing number of countries around the world to find trans women as the population at highest risk for HIV. So again, you feel the repetition. That's by design. That's purposeful. There are other things in this paper, but let's use the technique, the tactic of driving home the message by the repetition. What's the fourth place? Is in that online uploading box to the editor. It says optional. It's not, don't treat it as optional. And this is a place, since this won't actually be published with your paper, you can be a little bit more bragging, a little bit more sensationalizing, perhaps a little bit less objective sounding, or highlight some other unique feature to the editor. So here was the fourth place. For the first time ever, we have data from Paraguay demonstrating an astonishing disparity in HIV infection among transgender women. So you get the flavors a little bit more sensationalized. It's not going to be published this way. It's definitely an attention grab, maybe a little over the top, but 20 words, and it leads what's said in that box. That box, by the way, is sort of a digital equivalent of actually writing out and printing a cover letter that you sign, harking back to the days when we actually photocopied the manuscript and mailed it to the publishers. Okay, the other way that we look at this message crafting is in the workshop, we put the participants through the exercise that we call the elevator test. I don't know if you have this metaphor. I think you hear it with Hollywood, that you're in an elevator with a famous actor or producer and you have an idea for a movie and you have just a limited attention span, limited amount of time before they get off the elevator. So what can you say? You really only have one shot, one sentence. So it goes something like this. Oh, hi, imagine it's your boss, for example. Oh, did you finish that study in South Africa? Just trying to make small talk. They knew you were there, visited South Africa working on a project. What did you find? So again, they're not paying super attention. You can't overwhelm them with limitations and what failed, what worked, secondary findings, other things, nuances. This is a real sort of the real life equivalent of when you would use that messaging. 1 minute before she gets off to the next floor, tell her the message of your study in 1 minute, and do it in 22 words or fewer. So this is something that if you are a part of the workshop that we're planning, we will have you do this. And that becomes a mantra. It becomes the thing that you'll craft in 4 ways. It'll be the starting point of an early part of your manuscript writing, which in fact brings me to tip number 2. And it's this: once you have that message, what you should do then is know that this is where your goal is and work backwards in the order of writing. In other words, the metaphor being that it's faster to go down a mountain than up a mountain. And this translates in a number of ways. The very fact of getting this message clear is one way that this is one and the same with this. The second way that this advice plays out is the sequence or order in which you compose your paper. Now, you probably recognize these headings as the order in which a manuscript, you'll see a published manuscript. It begins with, title, of course, but then abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, references, tables and figures may be at the end. They may be interspersed into the text. Do not write your paper this way. This is my advice. If you're tempted to start and write it in this order, I think you're going to be more likely to have writer's block and bog down. Here's the order that I feel is running down the mountain rather than climbing up the mountain. Start with the tables and figures, particularly thinking I can say this message, I can write what our study was about in numbers if I can craft it into 3 tables and 1 figure, or 4 tables perhaps. And I'm not just, again, I didn't make this part up. I'm not just saying try to do this in 3 tables and 1 figure or 4 tables. Many journals will tell you in their instructions, we only allow 4 tables. If you have a figure, you may have to forego 1 table. If you have any exceptions, you may need the editor's permission before submission. Not every journal does that. Some are now saying 5 is allowed, but many go by this rule of 4. Why I'm saying begin with it is that you should be able to see the whole story of your manuscript in those numbers and figures. Okay, so if that's perfected, if that's complete, the rest of the manuscript will go faster. After you have the tables and figures, proceed to writing the results section. So what you're sort of saying to the reader is, dear reader, if you only read the tables and figures, the entire story is there in the numbers. But if you're a verbal learner, I will walk you through in sentences, what are the most important numbers in that table. And it's just stating the facts. The challenge to writer's blocks is you say the facts, but you want to say why and nuance and exceptions. It's just the facts. Don't say why it's important. Don't even say why you're telling them it. Just say the facts. The discussion now is what you do next, because that is where you say the importance of the facts. So if you progress, if the tables and figures are perfected, the results should almost write itself. The results anticipates doing the deeper dive on the numbers. Now here's the flip or the backwards feel to it. After you've written the discussion, go to the introduction. I'll say a little bit more on this later. But part of the reason of this is that the introduction is for original research is no longer a full review paper onto itself of your topic. The introduction is showing you know enough of the literature to know what a good question is. And that question is the one you'll answer in the discussion. So if you do the discussion first, it's easier to pose the question that you'll answer. If you start with the introduction, there is infinite numbers of unanswered questions in science. You can never answer everything. If you start posing all kinds of questions you don't answer, it's another moment of frustrating an editor or frustrating a reviewer that you never answered these questions. So do the discussion first. I leave the methods to later. I know some people are tempted to do it early because they have a protocol and they just edit the protocol. My advice is that often takes more time to edit down a 35-page protocol than to build up a 2 or 3 page method section. Abstract due towards the end. Now I know that if you've done a conference presentation, you already have an abstract. But if you haven't, revisit it again. Things change along the way when you write the full manuscript. At the very least, the journal requirements are going to be different than the conference requirements, so you'll have to revisit it. References, again, you probably should be putting placeholder and remembering where certain things are being cited, but revisit them in the end to make sure you have very carefully given credit to ideas and data from other publications. Okay, so a few more tips on the tables and figures. What I look for is what I call, does the table pass the fall on the ground test? And what I mean by this metaphor, this expression is, if I were walking in the street and looked on the ground and there are 4 pieces of paper lying there, I could scoop them up, read the title at the top of each of these. I see that they're tables. I could read the title at the top of the table and see table 1, 2, 3, 4. I could steal that paper. I go, I know what this study's saying. Of course, I'd have to make it up. I'd be lying, but it would be so crystal clear from those tables and figures that I could write that paper. I could steal it. And perhaps less shocking, what I would say is if those tables and figures come out of a workshop so perfectly crafted and so understandable, the rest of the paper can be done by email, a bit of back and forth to flesh it out. Okay, so start with the 3 tables and figures. Think of it this way. The whole story of your study is there in the numbers or figures. The other tip in doing this is it ensures the analysis is complete. I know this is frustrating. Maybe you have a statistician, you're waiting for analyses, it's not finished. You want to get writing and you start. Say, well, I'll start with the introduction. I know how that is, and fine, to some degree, you have to do that. But once you have the numbers and all the analyses complete, you'll see that it has changed. And now you may feel that some of that time was wasted. So having complete tables and figures ensures that the analysis is complete. The story won't change. It's there. Yeah, and again, this is what I said, that if I find them on the ground, I know exactly what it is. Now, to do this, each table needs what I have, each title of the table needs to have what I list here. Each table, even if it sounds repetition, even if table 1, 2, 3, and 4 is largely the same data we're talking about, still say what, who, where, when, how many on every single table. And what you'll be saying is, well, if they're on table 3, why am I repeating this? It sounds I'm wasting their time. If they read the whole manuscript, they would know. If you find yourself saying something like this, you've lost the battle, because a lot of reviewers, myself included, are going to start with the tables and figures. A lot of busy readers just read tables and figures. And while the numbers are correct and complete, if they have to start fishing through your text to find out what exactly it was they're looking at, they're going to be psychologically ill-disposed to say this manuscript is clear. Give them what they want. Give them what is really easy. Put at the top everything that's there. So what I mean, to give you the example in this title, so this is table 2. I've said something similar in table 1, but if you look at it, the what is there, it's HIV prevalence. The who is there, transgender women. The where is there, Paraguay. The when is there, and the how many is there. And you'll say, well, I kind of said something like that in table 1. I'll say it again in table 3 and table 4. Are you serious? Yes. Mark my words, psychologically, you are priming a reader to not be lost, not have to go back and figure out what it is. And you'll see that some don't. I don't know if I have an example later. Maybe I'll probably have it in the course later on, where I'll sort of give you a flavor of it. You might see a table 1 just say something like this: sample characteristics. And you're like, okay, yeah, okay, what was the study again? And if you're tired or you forgot where you left off, you'll have to fish around and figure out, all right, who, where, when, what, how many, where was this done? Put it there. Don't let them, if they fall asleep in the middle of reading it, they can look up and see where they are. Okay, go to the results. The results put in words what should be there in the numbers. But of course, not every single number in your table gets a full sentence or gets even necessarily mentioned in a sentence. What you're trying to do is guide the reader to the most important things, the standouts, the things that they really should know to understand your data. So I guess the stance I want you to sort of think of is this: you're sort of saying, dear reader, the whole story of my study is there in the tables and figures, but let me walk you through what are the most important. Okay, so reviewers will often say if you start saying too many of the figures in sentences, you often get a peer reviewer send you back something like, it sounds too repetitious to keep repeating all these numbers. So it's a little bit more judicious of what you want the flow of the reader to see and not saying everything. Okay. The other trick is the other tip is this: keep the flow very clear. Keep the order of writing about the tables and figures in the order that they are numbered. So in other words, talk about table 1, go to table 2, talk about table 2, go to 3, talk about 3. Do not jump back to table 1. Do not jump from 2 to 4 and back to 2. Hopefully it sounds intuitive, but I see this happen a lot. They go, oh yeah, I forgot a risk factor. Since a risk factor was education, I'm going to jump back to table 1 and tell them how low education was in this sample. Fine, you should do that, but put it in table 1 in order. So don't put it in table 2. If you jump back and forth, you will drive your reviewers crazy. And I guess in most European languages, we write from left to right. Also, and top to bottom, also follow this pattern. So if you have your table and you start to write the important things and you find that, as I'm writing it or as I'm saying it out loud, it feels better for me to start with marital status, income, education, rather than starting with residence and age, something like this. If the flow of the verbalization of it sounds better in writing, change the order in the table to match the flow of what you've written. So again, just as bouncing between tables will drive a peer reviewer crazy, bouncing up and down the table will also drive them crazy. Okay. After you've walked the reader in the results section through the important findings, proceed to the discussion. So this is the moment where, as you're writing your results, you'll be tempted to say why this risk factor is really important, why interpersonal violence predicts lack of HIV testing, because, there's barriers from the husband whatever the reason was, don't say it there. It's good, but don't say it there. Save the reasons and the importance for the discussion section. So this is where you tell the meaning of the numbers. So the results are only these bland, robotic statements of fact, not the meaning. The discussion now is more conversive. It's more a little bit of talking to the reader. And it answers a question. The discussion is answering the question that you in this order of writing, that you will pose in the introduction. So now if you flip to the introduction, it asks a question. It hypothesizes something, and it's almost saying it as if you don't know this answer already. But it's a trick to only pose a question that you very clearly answer. So it's easier and safer to write the answer to the question first and then go back and pose the question. The other reason I'm saying do the introduction later rather than earlier is you'll avoid endless reading and summarizing publications. So imagine you're waiting for your analysis to finish. You haven't quite found your message. You're saying, okay, I know I'm going to have to do some reading and summarize the literature. Yes, this is true. You do have to develop your expertise in the literature. That's a life career, activity, endeavor that you're going to do. But you do have to have some knowledge of it. But if you don't know where you're going, there is a massive amount of literature that you have to read, a massive amount of things to synthesize that once you do know where you're heading are irrelevant. Posing questions you'll never answer, delving into topics that are not ones that you're going to be talking about. Yeah. So it becomes a filter to make the introduction writing more efficient. And the other way of thinking of it is the introduction and discussion are somewhat mirror images of each other. So maybe this helps with the structure of this a bit. The introduction always begins with a big picture. Often it's the global epidemiology of your disease. It almost becomes cliche. So I would say don't overdo it. Like I don't know how many papers I've read that begin with UNAIDS estimates there are 35 million people in the world living with HIV. I'm like, roll my eyes. I've heard this a million times. But nonetheless, you do have to set the stage of how important the disease is. But don't linger there too long. Don't summarize everything about the disease. What you're trying to do is quickly pivot to a specific issue. So you're sort of saying, this is an important disease, and I am going to talk about a very important topic within this disease. And I'm not going to even tell you everything about the topic. I'm going to give you I'm going to set the stage of what we know in this topic, but I'm going to quickly get to the point of what we don't know. What is the gap, or what needs to be corroborated by studies? And that sort of can be converted to a question. It can be converted to a hypothesis, but it becomes an ask. So in my mind, think of the introduction as a way of posing a good question, not I'm demonstrating I'm the best expert in the world on this. That ask then is the way that the discussion begins. If you pose the question, you better clearly answer it, especially in the first sentence of the first paragraph of the discussion. Then again, in the mirror image, you answer the question and you discuss how this fills an important gap in the new knowledge. You expand there by comparing how this fits in the literature to other sites, where it might be similar, where it's different. And then you kind of end on this big picture once again, which is sort of this idea of, well, what does science have to do next? What programs need to be improved? What clinical practice needs to be changed? What future studies very specifically need to be done? Okay. Method section, as I said, it kind of stands out a little bit. You probably have enough information to write most of it, but if you have your message, then I think you can use this mantra. The methods is not a recipe for someone to repeat your study exactly. I mean, you might have heard that. The methods should allow the reader to reproduce your results. Only sort of. if they're an expert in your field and have done similar studies, yes, they could probably do that. But most of your readership is not expert in exactly how this is done. But what you do need to do is provide enough information that the reader can judge that your conclusions do stem from the data you collected. No more, no less. So just as it's bad psychology to pose questions in the introduction that you never answer, never say things that you did in the methods that you don't show the data for. And this is things like serological tests that were done or other measures that the questionnaire included, but you never talk about them. You never show them. That would be turning the reader off. You're promising something you don't deliver. And then they may say things like, you said you tested for syphilis, yet you do not show it. And now I'm actually very interested in syphilis. So they'll be against the paper. Again, this is not a protocol. It's not a recipe. The reader can write to you if you're willing and they want you to share the protocol, the full protocol. Okay. Abstract, again, towards the end, do last or revisit it again if you already have it. You follow the instructions of the journal to reformat for each journal. If you haven't written anything and you've followed my instructions, leaving it to last, then one trick for writing the abstract is cut and paste the first sentence of each paragraph of your whole manuscript and then meld that together as an abstract that almost can work right there. References, again, you should be carefully tracking where facts and ideas are coming from. Make a little note and don't lose sight of that. But the style nowadays of using references for original research publication is not a bibliography. It's not a comprehensive review. It's just to credit facts or ideas from other researchers. It's to demonstrate, again, the introduction is to demonstrate you know an important question, not that you've read everything. And 20 references is enough. Now, this is something that has changed since I began writing. When I asked my professor, how many references should I be looking towards? The answer was generally 40 to 50. And if you look now, most are going to be 15 to 20. And it's maybe the trajectory is going down. And if you read the instructions, some journals will say, we limit you to 20 references, 20 relevant recent references. If you need to go over, you may need permission. So again, not every journal does, but read carefully the instructions of how many references are needed. I think, in the day and age of reference managers, everybody began to have this habit of dumping their entire libraries into papers and hoping that somewhere in this mess, it backs up what they said. To my mind, that flags that the references being used there may not be saying exactly what is being said as well. So another caution. Okay, tip number 3, I've said it many times, follow the directions. And with that, do not be weird. I know when you have writer's blocks, you might be playing with font sizes and footnotes and color. Don't do that. Journals are expecting these manuscripts to submissions to look exactly alike. And if it looks weird, their guard is going to go up. And if they're saying they're not following our instructions, what else have they not been following? And this means things like, some templates will have different fonts for titles and things like that. But they might tell you things like, only use 11-point Arial. Don't use footnotes. Use references at the end. No color. If they don't say no color, I'm advising you against using color for a number of reasons. One is it will cost you $750 per page with any color for many journals. Some journals will say follow the standardized formats for randomized trials such as consort or observational studies or strobe, for example. If they say that, you might be given a pop-up that's a checklist of exactly how to structure your paper and what to include. So again, all of this is to say, if you've chosen a journal, and I think our workshop will talk about that more, the first thing you should do after choosing a journal is go to the website, look for some tab or some drop-down menu that says instructions to authors, and do exactly everything they say in those instructions. Okay. I know I keep glancing at my watch, realizing we're going over. Melina, we're okay to continue? It's going to go faster from this point, but
Okay, I think you can continue. We hope we have time for questions.
okay. I'll look for a stopping point, but I'll continue for another few minutes. Okay. The rest will go quicker. As I said, I've done the deeper dive and what I think are the most important tips. Tip number 4 is 4. What I mean by this is the template. This is that simple model that all my papers follow, or virtually all my papers follow. And it arises from crafting the topic sentences of 4 paragraphs of the 4 major sections of manuscript. So what are those? You've gotten a hint of them already. The introduction, here are the 4 big pieces. The introduction, the 4 sub pieces are: what's the big picture? What's the specific issue within this big picture that we're going to look at, and what's known about it? But it pivots on the third point, is what is the gap that we're going to show data that we can help fill. And then the 4th piece is a very quick transitional sentence about, therefore we did a study to fill this gap, something like that. The method sections now, again, follow the instructions of the journal. They'll often have many subheadings. If they don't say use specific subheadings, I'm looking for 4 things. The first thing that I need to see up front and center is a simple statement of what kind of study this was. Is this a secondary analysis of programmatic data? Is this an evaluation of a prevention program? Is this a cross-sectional survey? Is this a case control study? Is this a longitudinal cohort? Is this a randomized trial? You see where I'm going? I think a lot of you are epidemiologists, I assume. You know that there's very standard names for very specific study designs. I need to see that. And reviewers looking at public health paper submissions will also see that. If there's a distraction on all the measures and everything else you did, without them even knowing that this is a longitudinal cohort study, can be maddening. So make it very clear right up front. Then again, this may be my epidemiologist bent. I'd like to see something about the participants. What were the eligibility? How did you sample them? How did you recruit them? Okay, now, okay, good. I understand the study design. I understand how you got your participants and whatever biases that may entail. Now, what are the cool measures? What are the measurements that you did that this study is going to be based on? Great. Okay, now what's the statistical analysis? That last one can be very boring. It's very, how many ways can you say we did chi-square test or logistic regression? But it's required. Okay, the results section. I've given these names that may help me remember them. 4 pieces. Trust us, cool measures, no tricks, it's solid. So what I mean by these is the trust us paragraph is often aligned, it's aligned with table 1, and table 1 is often nothing other than the demographics of your participants. Now, part of you should be thinking, like, why would that be of interest? Well, this is sort of the paragraph where you're saying to the reader, trust us, we got the right sample to answer the research question. Here is what they look like. Here are the demographic features so you can see it was the right sample, and you can see whether this aligns with your populations or how they differ from your populations. So trust us. Okay, good. You see where we were. All right, and obviously we didn't do the study for demographic variables. We did it because we had some really interesting new measures that weren't in the literature before. And these are the important things. Maybe your outcome of interpersonal violence, your psychosocial scales, things that are new, haven't been used in this population, putting it out there other than demographics. So you're sort of saying these are the outcomes we're going to be looking at and the predictors we're going to be looking at, and here are their distributions in our sample. The no tricks is that even if you're not a statistician, you should be able to array your data in a way that everybody looking at it would say, aha, I see the effect that you're trying to tell. Sometimes that's best done with a figure. Sometimes it's best done just giving a bivariate analysis or some sort of stratified analysis to show it. And you sort of say, dear reader, you don't have to be a statistician to see this effect that I'm showing you. But you can't end there, because you're going to get a statistician reviewing your paper. And they'll say things like, but did you adjust for the sampling design? Is this multivariate? Was there confounding? Was there interaction? Was, repeated measures accounted for? So what I'm sort of saying is, even if you're not interested in those things, you have to say, don't worry, it's solid. We did those adjustments. The final table gives you gives you those results. They're robust. That's the idea behind the results. Okay, discussion section. 4 pieces. Mission accomplished. Not only that, mea culpa, kumbaya. So hope you're getting a flavor of where I'm going with this. Mission accomplished. By now, you should have received this message. That's the first paragraph. So the first sentence is the message. Mission accomplished. State it very clearly, very less than 22 words. If that's all the reader reads, you've done most of your work. Not only that, is sort of this transition to say, okay, dear reader, you can fall asleep now. If that's all you remember is my first sentence, first paragraph, fine. But if you're still awake, if you're still interested, we found some other interesting findings. Some of them were unexpected. Some of them are found in the literature. Some contradict the literature, and walk the reader through those interesting findings. So this is the technique of separate out the message, but don't let go of those other exciting things that you wanted to say. But now get the message out of the way with the first paragraph. You can walk through in any order you want these other interesting things. Okay, the mea culpa. Limitations. You've seen this. If you've ever read a paper, you'll see that not the first paragraph nor the last paragraph, you'll see a paragraph, it's usually the second to last, begins with, we recognize limitations of our study, or our data are subject to potential limitations. This is required. This is scientific. It's up to you to be the one to tell the reader, here are the most severe threats to the validity of what I've just told you. It's counterintuitive. You may not want to do that, but it's required. You have to be the one. Okay, so that, I would say, how many should you find? You should be at least able to find 3 potential biases of any study. I press my students to do that. Kumbaya is an expression of don't end on a bad note of all the limitations. Say, this was wrong, this was biased, this was incorrect. Good night. You'll psychologically leave the reviewer, leave the reader with a bad taste. So end on the kumbaya, the good thing. Now that we know this, despite these limitations, what can we do? What needs to change? What is the next study? How can this affect policy, public health practice, clinical practice? Okay, so I think I'm gonna not go through this example. I was gonna give you 16 sentences to give you an example. So I can kind of cut to the end. If you participate in the next webinar, I will do the deeper dive on this. So I'll save it for then. These other tips, I don't have too much more at the moment to say, but only write on a paper that interests you. Work to set time aside to write. Sometimes you can do this as a group, as a team. Put your paper through some internal friendly peer review before submission. My high school teacher's advice, write concisely. Use short words and only necessary words. Avoid long jargon, long words, jargon particular to your field. My messaging, again, should work. How long should a sentence be? 22 words or fewer for the most part. Short paragraphs, one topic. So if a sentence is one idea per sentence, break it up if it's more than one idea. A paragraph is one topic per paragraph. If you have more than one topic, break it up. The first sentence, as you know, is the topic sentence, which is why I have the 4x4. The topic sentence should tell the reader everything that's in that paragraph. The rest is supporting it. So start with that, give 3 to 4 supporting sentences. I won't give you this example for the moment. Another point to write concisely is this. It's easier for an editor to accept a short paper than a long paper. So that's another strategy. It's easier to communicate a clear message in a short paper. Another reason to not write too much is you are giving peer reviewers more targets to shoot at. In other words, they're perfectly happy with your main message, but then you went and talked more and more about something secondary and they didn't like that. That still can sink the whole paper. Okay. Should I do it? remember why you are publishing motivational speech. I try to make this interactive and ask the audience to do it. There's no time and too many here. So I want to give you two types of motivators of why you really do need to publish what data you have. One is you have an ethical duty to participants. If they've given consent to be in your study, they should be altruistically offering this personal information, not for personal benefit, but because it's going to benefit someone else. The only way you fulfill that promise is to publish so others can benefit. Moral duty to your country to address the issues that are of public health importance to them. Otherwise, the literature continues to be dominated by the West and United States in particular. You probably are thinking, oh, well, I want to have the biggest impact on health and disparities and policy and improve programs. Yes. Or generally, I want to contribute to knowledge. It's a life goal. You can also do it to inspire new research, or you can do it to corroborate or refute past research. The other thing I see in my students and mentees is that it's only when writing it up for publication that they truly understood why we did things that we did. So it really helps them understand the topic. So generally, these motivators are, you should publish because it is the right thing to do. Of course, there are more personal interests involved here. There's ego and boasting and narcissism. At least they go hand in hand with the good. Publishing documents the idea is yours. It means nothing to say, read a paper and say, I already knew that. I thought of that. We saw that in our clinics. We saw that in our data. We just haven't published. Too bad. You don't own it unless you publish it. It may be required to graduate, especially for epidemiology. It documents your research productivity. So funders want to see this. They might build this in as a deliverable on the funding you receive. It builds your reputation as an expert in the world. And this is done with even one publication. If you're the corresponding author on one publication, you will be asked to review other researchers' work around the world. In fact, too much. It helps for future grant applications. You have to demonstrate that you used the data from your previous ones. And all of this sort of falls under the heading in academia of publish or perish. Again, an expression that I think everybody has. Okay, I'm going to end there to leave at least, I think it hit the limit of the hour. If you're going to do the other webinars, I'll be doing some deeper dives and more technical aspects of each of these sections. But let me just end on the advice to not get discouraged. Yeah, lots of, get used to rejection. I sort of take a strange interest in how many rejections I can get before the paper is finally published, how old are the data and still manage to get it published, or how fast a rejection is. So let me end there. And there may actually not be any time for many of you to ask questions, but let me at least try. I'm happy to stick around for a bit longer.
Okay. I hope the Zoom won't close, right? Willi, if the time ends up, doesn't it close?
Oh, so nobody's on anymore?
Sorry?
Oh, I didn't understand what you were saying.
The meeting ends at 18:30, so doesn't it automatically close?
Oh, so everybody just got cut off at that moment?
Yeah, that's what I think, but let's see. But anyway.
Then maybe I did it exactly on the moment.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the great presentation. And I think I've attended writing scientific workshop, but I've learned a lot, especially about important finding as the message and 4 places where to place this message. And also it was new learning curve for what you have to discuss is to be in the introduction. So just see if there are any questions. I think there are 5 people who have raised their hands. Samantha, do you want to facilitate that?
So people are still there, right?
Yeah, people are still here.
Okay.
Okay, let me get to the questions. Let's see. Okay.
And there are some people who have raised their hands as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll go through. So I'm going to allow, and I'm so sorry, I do not know how to say your name, but the first one I see is Hervé K. So I'm going to allow you to talk. Just take yourself off mute and ask your question. Hervé Kingney Bogang. I see you raised your hands. I just allowed you to speak. So if you unmute your microphone, you can ask a question.
I don't know. Maybe we didn't recognize it. Hervé Kenya.
Okay, I'll skip that for now. Okay, the second raised hand I see is Youngji Joe. I'm just allowed you to talk. If you could take your thing off mute.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really helpful. I really interested in also listening the following webinar as you introduced in October, but when I went to IEA website, I couldn't see the announcement other than this month's today. So if you could share the link for the following webinar, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Okay, sure. We'll share once it has been. We still need to finalize the date, but once it's finalized, we'll share on the website. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next question, I see Bernadine. You can go ahead and take your mic off and ask your question. Or sorry, off mute.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. I really liked the presentation. And what I wanted to ask was if it was possible to have the slide presentation, because there were some areas that were also important that you really more like rushed through, and we couldn't get more on those parts.
So yes, the answer is absolutely. I'm happy to share it. I'm trying to think the best way to get it to everybody. I'm very happy to share it as a PowerPoint, and I know that a lot of you are maybe professors and have students or work in teams that could benefit from it as well. You're welcome to use the slides and adapt them as you wish. So I guess I'll ask Moline the best way to make them available to everyone.
I think Laura will share with one we have registered for the webinar.
Okay, so I'll send them to you, Moline.
Yes, you can send them to me, then I'll share with Laura.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Or I'll CC
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry I rushed. When I see the time is running out, it makes it worse because I get nervous and rushed. So yeah, the slides have a bit more that you might also be interested in. Yeah.
Okay. Next I see Ian. You will unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that insightful presentation. I think we have learned so much. And I think the other part that I wanted to find out, I think the sharing of the presentation, I think you've already mentioned, somebody asked about the same. Yeah, I think this is really good, yeah, and I'm looking forward to more of such presentation. Please don't leave me out in the next presentation, just like following up, and appreciate this great knowledge. Thank you.
Are you an IEA member?
No, I'm not a member yet. I think this was just shared by a colleague who is a member to this group.
So yeah, you might be lost in the loop if it has been shared through someone, but if you become a member, then you get access. It's automatically sent from the International Biology Association website. So if those are members, if it's not shared to you through colleagues,
Yeah,
you might not. Yeah, you might be not attend the following ones, but we'll try to share widely as well. So for the October and November webinars.
Okay, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
Hello.
All right. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for the great presentation. I am Mr. Kenya from Cameroon. I have learned a lot about this presentation because we are area career epidemiologists, and this type of presentation will help us to have a skills to be able to write correctly our articles. But I have an issue. I want to know how to do to be a member, to be a member, because I realized that there are a lot of information or mentorships that this kind of activities will help us to have to improve our skills, writing skills of in terms of grant writing or scientific writing. I want to know how I can do to be a membership is in order to beneficiate all the advantage to be a member. And I also want to ask if it's possible for the professor to connect us with other epidemiologist expert, where we can learn through them. That is my issue.
Okay, so I'll answer part of it, and I hope Prof. Willi will be able to answer the other part. So for you to be a member of the International Epidemiology Association, you say you are an early career epidemiologist. So if you go to the website, you should be able to join as an early career epidemiologist. And I know there is, in Cameroon, there is, what is it called? Amand, you can talk about that. I think Amand is there, who is the president for the African International Epidemiology Association there for the African region from Cameroon.
Yes, I am a member in Cameroon case. I am a member case.
Yeah, okay, so we will be developing activities, different activities for early career epidemiologists. You can also come up with suggestions if there are any suggestions that you want us to, for some activities that you want us to do. For like last year, I think we had a webinar on grant writing. Someone from EDCTP presented. We also had a webinar on mentorship as well. That was last year. So we have this follow-up webinars that we are going to have, and also in-person writing workshops that we are planning. But if you have any other suggestions, we are welcome to discuss them with the International Epidemiology Association executive. And I think there is another one, an immersion program that is coming in November that is going to happen in Portugal. I'm not sure if you applied for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
You wanted to talk about connection. You wanted to see if Willi can connect with other mentors. I'm not sure if Willi want to comment about, but Willi is not a member of the International Epidemiology Association. We invited him.
Well, I would think there's a few opportunities, right? That to join the next 2 webinars in this sequence would give more, capacity building and mentorship. Then I don't know how you'll decide who to accept to the in-person 1-week writing retreat workshop. But that would be another way to get mentorship and instructions. The other is if I'll write it in the we have a program at UCSF. If you Google ITAPS, this is our, remember I said we have a semester-long course that we do. You can apply to that program as well. It's free. So the version I'm thinking that works best is the online version. So rather than being in California for several weeks, we have an online version. So if you Google UCSF ITAPS, you should get steered towards the application to that program. And for that, mentorship is built into it. In fact, we run 2 programs at the same time. One is the training of mentors. So it's sort of the training of trainers, where we train junior and mid-career faculty to be mentors through this process. And they invite their mentees to join the writing hands-on workshop of it. And we co-mentor the people they nominate. So there's ways to get mentorship and mentorship training through that program.
Okay,
Um,
let's get moving on. So the next raised hand I see is Ali Artaman. If you could take yours off mute.
Yes, thanks a lot for the great presentation. My question is about choosing the journal for an epidemiologist who is not necessarily talking about a novel methodology. How should that person choose the right journal? Because some epi journals, they prefer a novel methodology or a complex analysis. I just need to know your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I guess I'll first answer it by saying I think the third webinar. Are we still
Oh,
on?
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one answer is I think the third webinar in this series, I'll talk more about choosing a journal. That gives a longer answer. That I think I agree with your observation. Journals that are epidemiologically focused are much more about methodological, like American Journal of Epidemiology. So you have, if what you have are original data on a particular disease or topic, I would shift gears and not shoot for the epidemiologic journals, those with that in their title, but rather journals that are more targeted to the disease or broader public health. That's one answer. A third answer that I find very handy is a website called Journal Author Name Estimator, or Jane. So we often very shorthand when someone says, how do I pick a journal? We say, ask Jane. So if you plug in your abstract or your title into the Journal Author Name Estimator website, it rank orders the journals that are most likely to publish things on your topic. I find it works very well. It's not the only way of doing it, but if you want a hint, that should do it. And I think it will, if your abstract or your main topic is not methodological or novel methodological, it will steer you to the journals that are interested in the actual content and the results. So Journal Author Name Estimator. It's something like, it's run by Biosemantics. I don't know if others are familiar with it. There are many tools to search for a match of a journal. I find this one is not linked to a certain publisher's house. A lot of the other ones will only pick it from Springer or whatever their company is. Jane will do it across. It's not dependent on the publisher. We'll say more of it if you do the third one.
Okay, next question is from Sumit Kumar. If you want to unmute your mic.
Yeah. Hello, Vilita. Thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. I'm speaking from India. I've joined this. I have a question for Vilita. So I'm working as a business development, and I'm not associated with academia. I've done engineering in biotechnology, but I'm quite interested in, writing, journals and publications. I have a topic. I mean, I want to work in the AI. I need to. I'm quite keen in this AI in pharmaceuticals because I'm working as a business development manager in clinical research organization. So I have been from 5-6 years. I've been through many this clinical trials. So that has given me impetus and interest to to write because I'm an avid reader and I want to write. I know few people who have 10, 12 publications and all, but I'm a naive in this. So could you guide me, like how can I start my journey in this particular?
Yeah. Find a message. Again, I don't quite know what data you have access to, and especially with pharmaceutical companies, there's going to be quite a lot of ownership issues. But if you have primary data that perhaps clinical data from participants, or even sort of things like
So particularly, I'm interested. Sorry to interrupt. So particularly, I'm interested in the integration of AI in drug discovery and development. So how could I proceed with this particular? Because this is my topic of interest.
Did you say AI, artificial intelligence?
Yes, sir. Artificial intelligence in drug discovery and development.
But do you have data, or is this more of an opinion piece?
So it's a more of I'm working over it. I'm working over it because on the same thing. So the work which I'm doing, I want to get it proper structured and get it published. So that's why I'm keen to how to come for all the things that you said. That is really very thankful to you. Now I have because before this session I was zero. Now I know something about it. So, I mean, I just had this, request like where to start from, just because that's the most difficult thing. I mean, how to start. I have the data with the thing, and it's in progress. But still, if I have a clarity that from where I could start, then definitely I'll start.
Okay. I mean, I guess I should say that this model that I'm showing everyone works best for original public health data, particularly epidemiology, public health, clinical research. It doesn't quite fit the model for a methods paper or a qualitative research paper or an idea topic or an opinion piece. So I still don't have a firm grasp. Your area is less familiar to me, and I don't have a firm grasp on exactly what it is. What the data you actually have, and I don't, even if you explain it to me, I don't think I can answer it right away. But again, I would say maybe start with journals that publish the type of paper, some sort of model to go with on that. Again, if it were epidemiological, you could see that my model fits a lot of what you would read. It might be different for the field of AI. So maybe find a template, find a paper. You could also search the literature for something very similar to yours. Maybe a starting point is follow the structure of paper that comes close to what you're looking for, and use that journal as the vehicle for publishing it. Yeah, but what I've presented here is is a model that fits epidemiology research, public health research, clinical research. It may or may not be the right one for yours.
Okay. So, I can be in touch with you if I need, any sort of.
Maybe explain a little bit more what it is. I might have a better insight.
Sure. So over LinkedIn, I'll be in touch with you. So,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, I just want to keep moving this along so everyone can get their questions answered. Next, if you could, Tinkani, if you can unmute your mic.
All right, thank you so much. I am Dr. Tinkani Mbichi. Right now I'm in Canada. So I have a question in particular, as a young upcoming early career researcher. I'm wondering how best can I increase my publication and citation record, keeping in mind that it's not always easy to find data where one maybe can easily get hold and begin to write something that can be published in that kind of format where you just presented, but just kind of a ballpark, low-hanging fruits where if one is keen and interested in writing, sort of, get hold of those easy publications. I'm wondering if you may have some tips to that effect.
I think so. I also teach undergraduates, and they're very motivated when they're applying to medical school. They're motivated to get a quick publication or two. And what I advise them is there's a format in a lot of clinical journals called it's either called a brief communication, a brief report, or data letter. And this format can work wonders for bolstering a CV and putting your name out there in the published literature while being a very, very concise communication. By that, look at the journals and you'll see they'll say something like, if it's under 1,200 words, which is very, very short. If it
Mhm.
has fewer than 10 references and only one table or one figure, you'll kind of see that, and they review it quicker, and if it's accepted, it usually goes into the very next issue. So it's my trick for students that want to get it on their CV before applying to medical school, for junior faculty that have big studies underway but are going to take years before they have enough data. You know, can they publish something quick? This format is very useful. It also gets cited a lot. It counts on your CV as a full publication. And it's blessedly short. It's not very much more than an abstract for a conference. So if you have conference abstracts, you could do this. If you have just a single message and it strips it down to a single message, it works really well. And you don't feel like you have to read 1,000 papers to get to that point. As I said, they limit you to 10. So look at that. That would be my quick and easy answer for your question of priming the pump, getting started, getting a few on your CV. I'll also say they're often very cited, because you know, someone can quickly look online, get the message, and cite you very, very quickly. So an 8,000 word paper actually is not necessarily going to be cited more than a 1,200 word.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay, next question, Nuhum. Nuhum, if you could unmute your mic. Nuhum Telly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Go
yeah.
ahead. Go
Go ahead
ahead.
and ask your question.
Okay. No, I have no question. So congratulations. It was very interesting. So can I have a presentation after?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what are you asking?
The slides, I think.
Oh, slides. Yes.
Yeah. Miss
We'll make them available through IAE's website. I'll be sending them to Malene shortly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Noon A.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Thanks so much for the presentation. I have a question that's a little bit different. I've had struggles kind of writing initially. And some of the things I was told about was writer's block. But I think my issue might be a bit more writing anxiety. I just wonder if you have tips for people who have kind of struggle with being anxious about writing, the process being a bit overwhelming, kind of like the fear of rejection that you've talked about. And also if there are like kind of like writing groups that you're aware of, like co-writing spaces.
Yeah, all these things are sort of exactly why we put the course together like this writer's block, this getting started, and this anxiety over rejection, which I'll confess to you, I've been rejected more than 1,000 times, and I still feel it. So, you know, it is something that almost never quite goes away. It'd be great to have you in one of the workshops because, you know, we try to get over the writer's block by some of the techniques I was highlighting here. You know, one of those techniques is not even putting words on paper, but just the numbers. As I said, if you've done the table, if it's quantitative data you have, anyway, the numbers speak for themselves and they're not even words you have to compose. And then the progression from there is you don't have to create poetry or, well, you know, these florid sentences just to walk someone through the facts. It's almost like a police report of X happened, Y happened, Z happened. So some of these techniques that I was sharing with you, we hope will address it. Part of the course also is what to expect with peer review comments, how not to get too defensive and how to respond to them systematically. Again, I hope you could participate in at least the next 2 webinars, if not the in-person one, especially if you have a paper or a study to workshop. Finding a writers group, the way I've seen it most successful is somehow close to your own team. I work with a group in Iran that I think have a wonderful model. There's about 5, 6, 7 researchers in that group. Most of them are junior investigators. And they not only work together to motivate each other, but they each switch off who is the first author of each paper. So in other words, they're working together so that say that it's 6 people with 6 different papers they're workshopping. They cross-make each other co-authors. I mean, again, the expectation is they do contribute as authors would. But this balances out a lot of the anxiety because you're working as a team, you're each benefiting, you're each getting criticism, each thing you have ownership of. That approach I find very successful for them. And, English is not their first language. They're all anxious to, compose and write and speak. But it's a sort of a turning peer pressure on its head to sort of a group motivation. So my advice about working in a group is one where you are equally vested in each other's success. Let me put it that way. Yeah, I don't know. These are just some of the tips. What you're describing is exactly what is a big barrier for our grad students, postdocs, and junior faculty. And we try to take it on. It's often easier to do this one-on-one. Yeah, I know. Was that helpful?
Okay. Next, Hani Demasi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. My question might not be directly related to the topic, but since you're such a published author, I thought I could ask you a question about metrics of authors' publications. If you have some feedback, I mean, I don't have to get the answer here. If you don't mind, maybe if you don't mind with an email. We're struggling with looking at the metrics, between the H index and now the field-weighted indexed impact factor index. I don't know if you're aware of it, if you have thought about it, if you have some information. I don't know if you can give me quick feedback, or you prefer if you don't mind, maybe having the answer on private discussion. I don't mind. Thank you.
Well, I don't mind sharing a few thoughts. As you know, there are so many metrics that are used. And I'm most familiar with the ones that are used for promotion, at our university and when I'm an outside reviewer of someone else's work. And it seems each institution is using different metrics, and it keeps changing over time. But if I were to at least share one universal thought, and it maybe is counterintuitive, I would advocate for quantity over quality. Now that sounds bad on one level. It sounds unscientific. But I know there are some indices that will weight quality over quantity. But my insight is it's hard to predict what paper you're going to write that actually ends up garnering the most attention and most citations. I mean, any way you look at it, publishing a lot is good, and having people cite your work is good. You don't get to either of those things unless you crank out a lot of output. And because it's so hard to predict who's going to cite you, and what you hit just right, or what you're too far ahead of the curve or too far behind the curve, because you can't predict those things, I would still say emphasize quantity over quality no matter what metric you're doing, because you can't achieve those others unless you have the quantity. So part of that may sound bad, part of that may sound counterintuitive. But I think it's the reality. And going hand in hand with that is lots of short papers with a single message. Get them published rapidly. Now, the flip side of this, sorry, I'm maybe oversharing too much. The flip side is if you do that to the extreme, you get accused of salami publication. I don't know if you've heard this expression. The idea is you have the meat that you have is one study, and slicing it too thin as salami can kind of get you in trouble. They'll feel it's duplicative and not self-standing enough. So there's a balance. But my answer to that is none of those metrics can actually happen unless you have some quantity. So is this 2 papers or 1 paper? Favor the 2 paper. Should this be one large, long paper with everything thrown in, or divided up into several short papers with different topics? I favor the latter in each case. Does that help?
It kind of, yes. I mean, I think we struggled a little bit with the same idea, but I think what I struggle the most with is this new which is the weighted field impact, which kind of like sometimes, even if you got a lot of citation, it pushes you down. And I have issues with that. You know,
I'm gonna have to look that up to see how it's crafted. To see if it kind of if it contradicts what I'm saying, or my advice wouldn't work with that index. But let me look it up. I'm not familiar with it. You said it's new, field weighted impact factor.
I don't. I think it's fairly new. I don't know how new it is.
Yeah, as I said, these usually come up only when I'm evaluating candidates for promotion or hire. Yeah.
And and that's the case here as well. You're right. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Rogelio.
Hey, hello. I'm Rogelio. I just wanted to say thank you for this. I'm registered as an early associate epidemiologist, greetings from Mexico, by the way. And honestly, this is all very, very useful to me. Like, really, thank you.
Great. I'm glad to hear it.
Okay, great.
That was it? No question. No. Okay.
Last question is Shri, if you can unmute.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the great presentation. Actually, I have 2 questions regarding the topic you just mentioned, and it was really interesting. Like, first thing is to keep everything in word limits. Like you told me, like you told everyone, there should be word limits like 25 words or less than 15 words or 50 words, whatever. It's like as you start writing, there are a lot of results and conclusions related to the specific message. So I have been through many rejections giving my research paper in publications or journals. So it's always very confusing how to concise a thing to a specific message, because there are many results regarding to the specific message what we are writing. And second thing is that as you mentioned the order of writing, I had a sort of problem with the audio in starting, but you just mentioned the right order of writing, like telling the 3 tables and writing the 3 tables and figures, and then result discussions and everything. But journals do have a specific protocol how to write things. So what should we do in that scenario? Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, for the second one, I don't want it to be misunderstood. I'm not saying rearrange your manuscript that you're submitting in a different order. It stays in the order that the journal instructs you to put it in, and has the content and structure that the journal's saying. I'm just saying compose it in a different order. Like, don't necessarily start with the introduction, move to the methods, move to the results, move to the discussion. So it stays in the order it's supposed to be as it's published. Just don't necessarily compose it that way. I'll soften. I opened that these were like the 10 commandments that you must follow on pain of death. Let me soften that. There are exceptions. And one of the exceptions is whatever works best for you, what avoids writing block for you. Definitely don't change that just because I have a different order, if it works for you. But if you are struggling with a format or a template or a model to follow, I'm offering this one. Yeah. And rule number 3, by the way, was always follow the journal's instructions. That would supersede anything I've told you. If the journal says to do it differently than any way I've said, go with the journal. You have to follow their instructions. The first point, I think I don't know if it was a question or an alternative thought on this idea of the single message. Again, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying permanently discard all other messages, all other findings. What I'm saying is organize your thought, organize the paper around a single message, at first as if that would be the only thing. And part of that is, for many readers, they're only going to get one message from your paper. They're not going to get the nuances and the 5, 6, 7 other secondary findings. So remember that they may only get one. And remember that an editor and a peer reviewer also is probably lacking the patience to have 5 or 6 interesting things in their head at the same time. So structure the paper, make clear that you do have a message that comes out and comes out strong. So to do that, you have to train yourself perhaps to set aside a lot of the secondary findings or nuances for later, but don't throw them away. Once you've accomplished the task of making a very clear message, you then can say, dear reader, here are some other very interesting findings I want to share with you. And that calms the mind to focus. It stops you from digressing too much before you get your main point out. It gives a clear structure, and it gives someone at a glance the ability to take something away from it quickly. Does that make sense? I don't know if it's an answer or, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was all the questions.
Okay. So Willi, before I conclude, I think I also had one question. For example, you do a trial where you have this, your objective is to find whether an intervention works or not. Then you end up having a negative result. So how do you make this important message that the trial didn't have an effect? Because you still need to present that as the main finding.
Yeah, a negative trial, you know, a randomized trial that shows no difference, no effect, a negative result is so psychologically challenging. It's heartbreaking on one level. You know, it's hard to get passionate about writing it up. And I've gone through this many times myself, but you have to remember, first of all, again, for motivation, it's scientifically as important to report negative results as positive results. That doesn't necessarily help. And I would also say another challenge is reviewers and editors are not keen about these either. They'll say, that should have worked. What did you do wrong? So it's hard to address. I'll tell you the one way that I addressed it when I had trouble publishing a paper. It was a paper where peer educators delivered messages to their friends in a different context, and it didn't show a difference between the control. And the language I used is particularly in that message box to the editor, but also in the discussion, was this result was not what we hoped for and not what we expected. And the body of literature supported that the trial really could have worked given the observational evidence. So in other words, I know what's the expression? Grab the bull by the horns, jump right in and say, yeah, this is crushingly disappointing. And we know that a lot of the evidence up to the point of the randomized trial suggests it had a good chance of working. It's not what we hoped for. It's not what we wanted. Here are some possibilities for why it didn't work. So in other words, embrace it. Embrace it not as it is kind of a failure. Own it, embrace it, jump right in and say, we're disappointed. And that maybe gives you more license, and it also puts the reader a little bit more at ease. Because you're kind of not saying everybody's wrong and we were right because it didn't work. You're sort of saying, yeah, we agreed with everybody this should have worked, but let's explore why it didn't. And I'll tell you further what I put in that box to the editor. I don't know if this was too manipulative after you hear it. I said, dear editor, dear Professor Kalishman, I knew his name. I said, as an editor of a scientific journal, you know that it is as important to publish negative trials as it is to publish positive trials. So I shamelessly appeal to his scientific integrity to say, you got to publish negative studies, you know, and that's the way I sort of got the attention of why he should be more interested in a negative study. But it is a challenge psychologically and scientifically. It's very difficult. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. I think once again, thank you for the great presentation. We learned a lot and we are looking forward to the subsequent webinars. So we will communicate regarding the dates for the subsequent webinars and then share widely with others to join the webinars. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for staying on to this point. Bye.
Bye.